Thank you, Mr. President. I want to talk today about the bill that we're considering currently, the Milcon VA bill that's before us. I really do urge the Senate to take up and pass an appropriations bill that does right by our nation's veterans. I think it is very, very important. But this Milcon VA bill before us today, and I might add along with the rest of the appropriations bills, is shackled to an unwise and unrealistic budget that locks in destructive sequestration cuts and vastly underfunds programs vital to this nation's security and prosperity, and doesn't deal with the challenges the veterans of that agency has to take care of our nation's veterans. But make no mistake about it, Americans' veterans would be severely shortchanged by this bill as it is currently drafted. Coming from the state of Montana, where we have the second highest per capita veterans population, I cannot look in the eyes of our nation's brave men and women and say that this bill will fulfill our promise to you. This bill underfunds our veterans by over $850 million, subjecting the VA to the across-the-board spending caps that the majority is desperate to avoid on the defense bill. That's hypocritical. Because let's be honest with ourselves, caring for our veterans is a cost of war. What we know and what the majority knows is that this bill is severely limiting the VA's ability to fulfill its mission, caring for those who have borne the battle. Need I remind everyone that just a few weeks ago, because of a surge in demand for hepatitis C treatments, and a historic increase in non-VA care referrals, the VA medical services account ran out of money. As a result, we had to pass emergency legislation to allow Choice Act funding to be used to shore up the VA and prevent serious disruption for veterans across this country. The budget pressures that caused that shortfall are the result of an unprecedented demand for services in terms of both numbers and complexity. And that demand will only continue to grow. At some point during the next year, nearly half the veterans will be 65 years old or older. Many of these folks will be seeking treatment to deal with the effects of toxic exposure, something that we are struggling to better understand and treat, and something that could have effects on their children and grandchildren. At the same time, a younger generation of veterans is struggling to cope with the unseen wounds of war. They're fighting to keep their lives and their families together, and for some of them, it is a daily struggle to overcome the suicidal thoughts that claim the lives of at least 22 of their peers each and every day. Those are the stakes here. They are that high. We're also talking about an unprecedented demand for expensive new treatments for diseases like hepatitis C that are shorter in duration and with fewer side effects and have cure rates approaching 100%. That is good news, but we have to have money to do that. We are talking about addressing chronic shortages of medical professionals, particularly mental health professionals in rural America, which greatly hinder our ability to provide veterans with timely and quality care. We're talking about a growing population of caregivers who have been forced to abandon their jobs and their livelihoods to care for loved ones with debilitating medical conditions. And we're talking about facilities that are literally crumbling, in some cases severely impacting delivery of care. I believe that we need more transparency and accountability from the VA to ensure that spending taxpayer dollars in a responsible way. But let's be clear. Today, we're asking more and more of the VA, and this bill gives them less than they need. Now is not the time to take a step backwards, because if we do that, we're never going to catch up. If we don't enact common sense, long-term budget that better reflects our priorities, our values, and provides the tools and resources required to fulfill our promises to veterans and their families, then we should all question just what are we doing here. Mr. President, there are cases when each of us has looked at a bill or an amendment and said, you know, it's not perfect, but it's good enough. Sometimes that's what it takes to get work done around here. But when it comes to our veterans, when it comes to restoring confidence in the VA after the problems that they have had in the last 2 years, I don't think that's a path we should take. I know my chairman, Senator Kirk, did his best in writing this bill to soften the blow of budget constraints that he was forced to meet. I truly appreciate his efforts and his inclusiveness in working with me. But the fact is, he was handed a no-win allocation by his party's budget. You can't patch the holes in the VA budget created by sequestration. You can't shift money from known medical care requirements, treatment for cancer, diabetes, or kidney disease, to name just a few, to plug gaps in emerging requirements such as life-saving but costly new hepatitis C treatments. That is why I offered an amendment in committee to restore $857 million to bring the VA to its requested level. Unfortunately, none of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle joined me, and it failed in a party line vote. I am at a complete loss as to why we're now being asked to move to a bill that we all know underfunds the VA by almost $1 billion. For what? So that we can send this bill to conference with the House, whose own VA bill underfunds the VA by $1.4 billion. $600 million more than the Senate. That will not improve the quality or the timeliness of veterans' health care, nor will giving the VA authority to fire more doctors and nurses without due process. It's time to stop the political games and maneuvering. To serve our veterans, to serve this country, to serve all Americans, Congress must establish funding levels driven by what the VA actually needs, not by some arbitrary mathematical formula. We need rational, realistic, bipartisan budget agreement to replace the draconian sequestration funding levels entrenched in the majority's fiscal year 16 budget. I've been calling on Senate leaders for months to sit down and hash out a long-term budget agreement. The majority leader's response was to wait until the day before the government is scheduled to shut down and pass a short-term CR. As early as tomorrow, we expect to vote on an appropriations bill that will drastically underfund the VA for the next fiscal year. This is clearly an attempt to paint those of us who think this bill is insufficient as voting against veterans. But I know that plan won't work, because I'm here to tell you veterans are well aware of the funding shortfall. It's one of the chief problems that's currently plaguing the VA. And I will continue to provide adequate funding to support America's veterans. And while I am disappointed the majority wouldn't work with us on a broader budget deal this summer, the CR that we passed today gives us just over 2 months to reach a reasonable budget agreement, and an agreement which will support our veterans, agreement that members on both sides of the aisle agree that we need. That is the job that we're elected to do. But make no mistake, if we're having the same conversation on December 10th, we have failed. Failed our veterans, failed the American people. I urge my colleagues to oppose the motion to proceed to this bill so that we can finally negotiate a bipartisan budget agreement that will do away with the devastating impacts of sequestration and will instead provide a responsible way forward to fund our government, to protect our national security, and to care for this nation's veterans. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Request the absence of a quorum.